32. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order, knowing that we have 3 different meetings again. Tonight we're going to start out with our RDA meeting. And with that, I do need to take a motion to go into an RDA meeting.
Mayor, I'll make a motion that we open our RDA meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Second.
Second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, as part of our RDA meeting, we have a set of minutes that we need to approve. So hopefully, council, you've had an opportunity to read those. And from September 17th of 2020, is there any corrections on that or any changes? Okay, then I will take a motion to accept those.
Madam Mayor, I motion that we accept the minutes of the Redevelopment Agency of Layton City, September 17, 2020.
Second.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to stall briefly. I see Mr. Day coming in now. So in the meantime, I will, our second item of business is going to be presented by Mr. Chad Wilkinson. So Chad, if you want to come up to the podium and go ahead and kind of explain the Davis funding for us for Main Street.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the RDA board. This is kind of a neat application that we were introduced to by the folks from Davis County, specifically the Davis Fund, which is a small business loan program, a fund that's set up by the Davis Council of Governments. Several years ago now, they put together this facade improvement program for Main Street specifically. Had a couple of cities that they started out with as a trial run. It went well, so they've continued that program. They invited Layton City to be a part of that application this year, and we submitted an application and were approved for funding. Just to go through a little bit about that grant application, in your packet you have some details, but it's a $25,000 grant that they give to cities that has to be matched by the local community with that additional $25,000. So it has to be a one-for-one match there. That funding has to be used for improvements on main streets, historic downtowns in the various cities that they give that funding. So we put together an application after receiving that approval from the Davis Fund. We solicited some applications, got 8, 9 really good applications. We had criteria that were taken from the Davis Fund's application that we reviewed those applications by, scored each of those applications, and came up with 3 potential recipients for that grant funding. And those are shown there on your screen in yellow. Those first 3, Great Harvest, Jed's Tires, First Community Bank, are those that we'd recommend for funding. I'll get to that recommendation in just a moment. I want to talk a little bit more about this grant, though. Again, it is for Main Street improvements. You'll see that completion date is December 31st, 2020. The county has committed to us that they'll work with us on that as long as we're actively working towards completion of these. We got the application a little bit late in the year, so they've committed that we'll work on that and continue to work towards completion. Again, it's mostly meant for improvements to building facades. So if an applicant came, in fact, things like landscaping and parking are excluded. So if an applicant came to us and said, hey, I'd like to redo my landscaping and my parking on this particular building, we'd have to say, unfortunately, that doesn't meet the criteria. It's really meant to give that visual impact, building facades, architecture, those kind of things are the things that this is really meant for. So just want to go through those that we're recommending approval for really quickly. These are the criteria. I'm not going to go through each of those, but these are the criteria that we used in reviewing each of these applicants for funding. So the first one is Great Harvest Bread Company. Pretty much a complete renovation of their facade. This is the existing facade with some siding, some old roof, deteriorating roofing material, some posts out there, columns. Their proposal is to do some exposed timber type posts with a new roof, new awning roof, that is to say, some shiplap type siding here, some really nice gooseneck lighting that would illuminate their signage, a little bit of signage on the side of the building as well. Signage is eligible for funding with this particular grant. So that one scored very highly because of the visual impact that would be obtained by that improvement. Next one is Jed's Tire Pros. This is one that we had an initial design and then a revised design. The revised design scored very highly. It's to replace their existing facade with brick. You can kind of see the visual impact that has on that particular building. That just goes on the entire building there. So replacing that existing kind of cinder block and some windows with brick while maintaining a good portion of windows there along the front. Lastly, First Community Bank of Utah, they want to replace the stained glass windows and some of the broken windows along their front facade. Again, this is one that scored very highly because of the visual impact on Main Street and a desire to refurbish that historic building there along our Main Street corridor. This is just some details of that. In your packet were the details of all the other applications that were submitted. I'm not going to go through each of those in detail, but our recommendation based on this application process is that we award grant funding for 3 of the submitted projects, which would be Great Harvest for $25,000, Jed's Tire Pros and First Community Bank. Jed's Tire Pros at $20,000 and First Community Bank at $5,000. These amounts all would require participation by the applicant still. It wouldn't be just fully funded by the city, so there'd still be some applicant participation. They'd still be required to complete this in a timely manner. Again, the county's going to work with us on that completion date, but we still are going to press to have this work started very quickly because the idea is that we have a visual impact very quickly from these projects. So with that, I want to explain the recommendation and the resolution just a little bit to you so you can, there's kind of 3 parts to this. First of all, you're going to be considering whether to essentially accept these grant funds from the county and approve that local match of $25,000, which will come out of our RDA funding. You're going to approve the agreement that we would again participate in this program with the Davis Fund, and then lastly approve the recommended expenditure of funds for these 3 projects. So we are recommending approval of this based on those amounts, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Okay. Council, any questions?
I do. So in the allotment of money, how you have it broken up, I am questioning, I think this is great, actually. I am so excited about this. But where the expenses with Jed's were proposed to be higher than Great Harvest, why is he receiving less or not an equal amount? I just am kind of curious if there's a reasoning. How did you determine who got the higher amount? Because obviously it's not based on what total projected costs are.
It's not, we took that into account, but there are criteria. I didn't spend a lot of time on these, but those are the criteria that these were reviewed by. We had a scoring sheet, actually. There were 3 members of the department that went through and scored these independently, and then those scores were tabulated to see how the projects came out. So it really comes down to, there's a variety of things we look at, and we can go through each of those, but it just came down to how each of those projects scored on each of those, and Great Harvest came out the highest of those projects. The other projects scored very well, but that came out the highest, so we did determine to give them a good chunk of that funding. However, again, it was based on a score put together as part of a matrix that went through each of these, and some of them scored high on some things and not as high on other things, but that's the answer.
Okay. Was aesthetics at all taken in as to which one will be more visually impactful as far as the change is concerned?
That's one of the guidelines, certainly, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
What about it?
I think Jed's is, I think the change to that is more of an impact than the change to Great Harvest. Great Harvest is great. It's an update, very similar in structure. The Jed ones is a very different change. It's a complete renovation of the front of that building, which from the street view, I think is, they're both important, and they're both great, all of them are great businesses. But I was just kind of curious on that, especially where the costs are higher on that one than on the other one. So that was just my thought. Yeah,
again, that visual impact is one of several criteria that we look at. So it also had to do with, timing and we could go through each of those various criteria there, but pedestrian scale, some of those things that are important there. I don't know that it makes sense to go through each of those, but there were restoring historical character was one of those things that we looked at. So, there's a variety of criteria, not just visual impact.
I have just a general question. Now, you mentioned that when they receive the grant funding from the county and then we match it and then they have to pay whatever's remaining, right? So is there any benefit to spreading it to all eight applicants if they're all going to move forward with it? Wouldn't all 8 of them, having received a little bit of the money and then said they want to move forward with renovating, wouldn't Main Street look better with 8 renovations instead of 3?
Some of them didn't meet the criteria as well as others, so I think we'd be a little hesitant to say that we would want to fund everything. I think, you could certainly, I think we're trying to get projects to completion, and I think some of those projects would require enough funding that if you just gave them a little, they might decide not to go forward. We feel like the amounts we're giving are going to make these viable projects.
Really. If we give them the funding and this is their proposal, that they have to follow through with the full completion, right?
They do.
So, if they're giving an application and saying we're willing to spend, Barlow, who didn't get any money, we're willing to spend $65,000 and we'll move forward with this. If we gave them $10,000 and they move forward with it, are they legally required to move forward with it? I guess that's my question.
I guess we're trying to make it as viable as we can to make sure these succeed. And while you could take, that kind of approach, I think, the chance of those going forward may be a little bit less. I don't know if Barlow's an example of that, but some of these others may not go forward without the full funding or without a substantial amount of funding. And I think the concern that I would have with that approach is that it's a reimbursement. It's not, we don't give them a check up front. So, we could run into a position where we have this money still there that didn't get spent because there wasn't enough to really make it a viable project. So I think we want to give them enough that there's some assurance that the project will go forward.
Well,
So that's our approach.
Okay, and also keep in mind that this is the first year that Layton's participating, but this is an ongoing program.
It is.
So it will cycle back around, or we could have funding even next year as well. So it's one of those things
Yep.
where it's going to be an annual program. So
And
we'd
honestly,
highly encourage everybody to kind of resubmit.
it may be something we even want to look at providing some RDA funding even without the
County.
matching funds in the future to go forward. So
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Nada? Okay. Council, are you prepared to go ahead and take action on this particular item? If so, I'd entertain a motion.
Mayor, I'll make the motion that we accept the RDA resolution 20-05 as discussed.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Well, second.
Okay, I heard the second by Mr. Morris. He's is calling in online, so I'll accept his second. So with that, all in favor of accepting, well, excuse me, this is a money situation, so I do need to take a roll call vote. I will start with Councilmember Thomas. Member Fitzpatrick.
Aye.
Okay, Councilmember Morris.
Aye.
Councilmember Bloxham.
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas.
Yes,
Or Day, sorry.
Thomas.
I'm used to
Fair.
calling him Thomas
You get that
instead of Day. Make that correction, it's a Day. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, you guys. Okay, that's it. So, actually, that brings our RDA meeting. We've been able to address all the items on our agenda. So with that, I could entertain a motion to close our RDA meeting.
Close. I make a motion, we close the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And I second that.
It's been moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we will now move on to our, excuse me, sorry, I forgot. We got to wait. Sure.
So to the Riches and the Florences, thank you for taking the time and investing money in helping make Main Street look better. I think these will be great projects. Like I said, I go to your businesses and I am glad to see that you're willing to participate to help our downtown improve.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. We look forward to both of them being expedited there. Okay, you good? Okay. Now that we have our audio back up, we'll go ahead and move on into our regular scheduled work meeting for October 1st, 2020. As we traditionally do, we'll start out with our reports from our council members. So council members, do you have anything to report back as far as any of the committees or assignments you've been on?
Nope.
Okay.
We had Councilmember Morris and I were, and I guess Councilmember Fitzpatrick as well were, and Mayor, were involved in the League of Cities and Towns discussion this week. And it was very important. I think it was good information, especially for those of us who are new, to be able to kind of touch base with other elected officials and see, what goes well and what doesn't. And my overarching conclusion was that we're very lucky to be serving in Layton City with the professional staff that we have and with the relationship we have with each other and with the mayor and with the citizens. We are very blessed to be here. So it was good information and grateful that we could learn and try to be better at what the citizens have asked us to accomplish on their behalf.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you saying that, and that's true. I mean, that does go a long way when you have a good collaborative effort here amongst each other and feel that you can have an open discussion and know that in the end there's no hard feelings and that you'll make the right decision, what's best for our city. So thank you. Okay, anybody else have any reports? Okay, seeing that there's none, we will move on to our training moment by Mr. Gary Crane.
Who shows up?
I did. I fell asleep in my chair. But I'm feeling a lot better now. Thank you. Well, thanks. This is supposed to be a training moment, and so we'll just take as little time as we possibly can. And I hope these are useful to you, because if they're not, you need to tell me, and you need to tell me those things that you'd like to learn a little bit more about. But
I'll tell you.
yeah, everybody except Councilman Thomas. Last week we talked about, if you remember, last meeting we talked about the different hats you wear, and the fact that probably the primary hat you were elected to wear is that legislative hat, which is making those decisions on ordinances, and you'll pass an ordinance tonight. You've got one on your agenda after public hearing that you'll pass tonight. But in addition to that, you wear another hat, and it's the one that is probably the hardest to wear, and that's the administrative hat. So I was just going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to start with a story, because if I start with a story, you're never going to forget this story, all right?
True.
I don't know if any of you knew the police chief, Chief Keefe, the previous police chief. Did any of you know him? I knew him when he was young, in the younger days, and I used to work at West Valley in my younger days and his younger days when he was a brand new police officer. And I remember we went out to try and check on, there was a raceway out there. You might remember the raceway out to the west. Bonneville Raceway, right? And it's gone by different names since then, right? Young and...
RMA.
But they used to have a thing called the fox hunt, and I never could really figure out why they gave it that name, except for the fact that it was a wild and ruckus. It was almost a riot is what it was. And I remember Chief Keefe and I decided we'd go out so we could, he and the rest of the force were out there, and they asked him an attorney would come out and just kind of make sure that they were doing everything copacetically in case they had to make arrests, that type of thing. So I was out there, and I noticed that people were getting, the more the night went on, the worse it got. And they started being disruptive, and they started throwing things, and the police didn't have enough vehicles to contain them all. I'm going to make this a shorter story. But Keefe, this is the reason he was police chief in Layton, I'm sure, because he thought real quick about what he was going to do. And because 3/4 of them were 99% of them were intoxicated, almost beyond belief, he went out to the parking lot and he spray painted a line, a great big circle, just like that. And then he had his canine officer come over and he had him stand right there with his dog. And then he started pulling these people out of the crowd, and he told them, if you cross that line, the dog's going to get you. And so you got all these people is standing there looking at the line, literally inside that circle. And they didn't leave that circle all night long till the end of the night when they had enough cruisers to be able to take them away, right? And so how does that apply to administrative acts on the part of the city? That inside that circle was a safe place, at least they thought it was, for them to be. Outside of the circle was the dog, was the rabid canine, which, by the way, it was one of the nicest dogs that I've ever seen. I don't think it would have bit anybody, but just the fact that the dog was there was enough of a threat. So what I'm talking about tonight is I'm talking about what I would call the safe circle for city councils. Safe circles for those who make administrative decisions, for planning commissions. Safe circles for our zoning administrator and for those who make these administrative decisions. Administrative decisions are decisions where you're applying the law to a particular set of facts. Because the assumption is you've already made the law, the city council has already made the law, and you've thought it through. And Councilman Day made an excellent point last time, and that was that, you know what, we better get the zoning right. We better get the things that we put in there as conditional uses right. We better get those things that we put in there as permitted uses right. And we better get the ordinances that we put in place right, because if we don't, then we're not going to be able to make proper administrative determinations. There was a day when you could add stuff as you went along to applications. But time caught up with us, and the development community became more aware that we were doing a lot of that we were adding additional things that were not in the code. And so if you take a look at the handout that is in front of you, the code section that is on the back of that handout was given to us, and I'm just going to summarize it because you don't want to read all the legalese. But it says essentially that if someone files a completed application and pays their fee, then the city council is only allowed, or the administrative agency, when you're acting with that administrative hat on, is only allowed to require those things that are within your ordinance when you impose conditions on these subdivisions that come in, and site plans that come in, and commercial developments that come in, and the others. So what does that mean? That means essentially that we've got to make sure that we get our ordinance right. And what ends up in happening, you don't know, I'm sure I don't remember all of our ordinances. That's the reason we depend a lot on staff and the planning commission to let us know what the ordinance says we can do, and then we proceed forward with that. If we think that something needs to change, we'll change the ordinance. The city council has the power to change that ordinance. If you don't like the fact that you've got 10-foot side yards and 10 foot on one side, 8 foot on the other, you change it. You change that. But you don't change it in the middle of an application when you're making an administrative determination. And so the significance of administrative determinations is that this is where you can get into the most trouble, by applying requirements and conditions that are not contained in your ordinance. And some of those items in your ordinance are very flexible. They will say, you know what, you can vary your landscaping if you do this, that, or the other thing, or you can vary the height of the fence, or in these cases you need fences, but they can be exempted if you go to the planning commission and get an exemption. There are exemptions that you built into the ordinance. But if you don't have an exemption built in the ordinance, and the ordinance says you must do this, and you require something over and above that, you could be into an area that we refer to affectionately as regulatory taking. So tonight's message is, you've got on the front of that handout that you've got outlined for you all of the administrative decisions that you will make, and you take a look at who makes them. Sometimes the planning commission makes them, sometimes staff makes them, sometimes the city council makes them. They are the items that are not colored. The legislative decisions that you make are colored in yellow. The only one I would add to that land use type legislative decision that you make would be annexations and dealing with annexations. Next time what we'll do is we'll talk about development agreements, because I promised you it'd only take 5 minutes to give these little presentations to you. Do any of you have any questions regarding administrative decisions? And we'll be talking a lot more about this, but take a look at all the administrative decisions you make, and they're like landmines. But remember the circle, that you are protected from liability as long as you remain within the circle. If you get out of the circle, your arguments for protection go away. Any questions?
Gary?
Yeah. Yes.
Just an example. I don't know if you remember, we had on the Planning Commission, we had a project that was, all the conditions were completed. They did everything that they were asked to do, and they got to the Planning Commission for the final approval before it got sent to the City Council. A discussion started happening about traffic and safety and the health and welfare of residents and citizens, and there was an argument that started about the fact that, wait a minute, you can't, they've already complied with all the conditions. What you're talking about is something now different. It should have been talked about early on, and it wasn't, whether it was even before they started talking about that development. Is that, and I remember Mason talking to us about this as well. I said, you've already approved this, and the vote on that vote for that administrative issue wasn't unanimous, and the ones that voted against it were voting against something, at least in my estimation, were voting against something they shouldn't have been voting against, because it wasn't part of what they were asked to vote for that evening.
Yeah, what you've done is just define the fact that there may be times when we have stepped out of that circle.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent example. What you've got is somebody who's complied with all the ordinances, done everything that they should do under the ordinance, and your staff helps you with that. They'll indicate, our engineers especially, is it safe? Are the streets safe? Are the crosswalks where they need to be? That type of thing. The engineers will help you with that in making that final determination. And then you'll make that determination, and to add additional requirements after that would be stepping outside of the circle. You're right.
Yeah, and what we were talking about, that the argument, the discussion that turned into an argument a little bit, wasn't off the, I mean, it was talking about safety. It's a real issue. It wasn't the time, unfortunately.
Safety.
Okay.
That.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. We're good? Yes.
I'm sorry, why did he bring it to us?
Should I just ignore him, or?
Why would you bring it to us? It's a done deal.
Yeah.
I mean, so if it's already done and we can't change anything, why is it coming here?
The reason it comes here is because if there are a lot of those administrative decisions you make where it's an and or. You know, you can do this or you can do that. For example, in the sensitive lands ordinance, you guys will look at those subdivisions in the sensitive lands. They allow you for options. Now, if you were to disagree with the option that the Planning Commission actually proposed for the subdivision, and you were to think that something else ought to occur as a result of your public hearing, then you could change that.
So we do have some.
You do, yes.
Okay,
Yeah, that's a great question. There is flexibility in your ordinance. You need to know that. It's not all 10-foot side yards, 20-foot front yards, 25-foot front yards. There are options for you, and that's the reason those final decisions that you see on there come to you.
That makes sense.
Does that help? Have I confused you or helped? Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks.
I see enough nods, so thank you very much for that training moment. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3 on our agenda here, which is the amend the municipal code. So very timely. Chad will be presenting that to us as well.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This next item, I'm going to have to go to a different folder here real quick. Get the right one here. This is an amendment to our sign ordinance to allow for some signage in our agricultural zones. Right now, under our current code, there are very little, if any, allowances for signage in the agricultural zone. A few exceptions for agricultural uses that have farm stands, things like that. But for businesses within the agricultural zone, which we have a few that are allowed, Recently, a veterinary clinic was built in our agricultural zone as one example of that. There really aren't any current sign ordinances that tell us what can or can't be developed there. So these standards that have been proposed are to allow for some reasonable signage in the agricultural zone for some of these primary and accessory businesses, while still trying to preserve that agricultural character of the A zones, the agricultural zones. So just to be really brief, and then I'll show some pictures, which again are worth 1,000 words. The basics are to keep the size to a fairly small size for detached signs. That would be monument signs in this case in that zone. To keep them at monument signs, so that would be a maximum height of 6 feet for these signs, maximum size of 50 square feet. Some setback standards, illumination. I'm going to explain that a little bit here in just a moment, but rather than having internally illuminated signs, having signs that are illuminated by indirect sources, having some really high quality materials incorporated into these signs is important in these standards. And that's really the basics for those detached signs. On the attached signage, again, we've tried to give some reasonable allowances for some attached signage. That'd be signage up on the building. You can kind of see those standards there. I don't plan to go into too much on that because they're essentially just a square footage allowance based on the lineal foot of the building. There are some illumination restrictions there that I'll go into as well. You'll see on some of these detached signs. Same thing for, again, those, I want to see the distinction between those. I think we may have a repeated slide there, but the going to go down and show some of these examples of these. These are some examples of the monument signage that could be allowed. You can see the combination of materials. They're kept fairly small, relatively small, 50 square feet. Still a large enough sign to have some good signage there. Variety of materials allowed. The lighting standard would be to allow for either indirect lighting or what they call halo lighting, which is some very subtle backlighting around some of these channel letters. You can see that illustrated on this sign and on the sign here on the lower right hand side of the exhibit. Another few examples of that, again, looking for some high quality signage there. This is the sign on the lower left is actually the existing sign that the Bayview Animal Clinic has in Farmington. And that's another example that would fit this code and would be allowable under our proposed code standards. So with that, this was reviewed by the Planning Commission, and they did recommend approval of these sign standards. And if I can answer any questions, I'd be happy to do so.
Questions?
I have a couple. What is the reasoning behind not allowing awning signs?
You know, I think awning signs are typically associated with a downtown area. That's really the only reasoning I can give you. We felt like there's probably not a lot of places where those would be applicable anyway, where there'd be awnings. I don't know that I have any other good reason besides that for you.
Well, because I was thinking as I was reading this and as I drove past Day Farms, you know, they have the little building, a little awning on it with a sign, I think would actually be, not that I want you to do that, but would be an appropriate thing to do. I mean, it provides shelter for those that are standing in line purchasing produce and, you know, things like that. I could see that I think that awnings could fit in those kinds of structures. It's just a thought. Doesn't have to be, but that's just I just couldn't understand really why they were not permitted.
I think just again, they're usually associated with more downtown areas, more commercial areas. So we felt like there was enough attached signage that could take care of some of those needs. I also will again go back to, I didn't show these slides. This came up at the Planning Commission though. Produce stands, things like that. There's already some allowances in our code for those types of uses, not only in the ag zone but also in our commercial and mixed use zones. So those have their own. Again, allowances for those types of signage when you're selling produce in the various zones. So potentially somebody could have, and you can kind of see what some of those are. Let me see if I can find the other piece here. I think the main section on that is that if you're selling farmer direct goods, there's some signage allowances for those buildings, and they're really, in that case, we have some fairly liberal standards that are applied that can give people the signage they need for those types of stands.
Okay. And then the other question I have is agricultural zoning that sits on a piece of property that they have either given permission or leased out for an outside business to place a sign on their property. Are those allowed?
Could you give me an example? I'm not sure I know what you mean.
So Roberts Farms, that sits on the corner of Angel and Weaver Lane, allows a builder to have a sign in there advertising the construction of a subdivision in Kaysville, actually, on their property.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a legal sign. I became aware of that fairly recently, and we're going to be having our code enforcement look into that signage, but I'm not sure that's a
It's been there
legal.
for about 3 years, but
And I just became aware of it, but that's
okay. But that would prevent.
an off-premise sign's not covered in these
Okay.
standards. Yep.
All right.
Okay, any other questions?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I'll just make a comment. Since I was there at the Planning Commission, I thought you handled it very well there, because Tyson brought up the concerns about us ag people that have ours, and the definitions are there to separate us out. But I think it was good that those commercial businesses that we are allowing into those zones have certain limits on the signs, as this takes care of.
Thank you.
So I think it was very good discussion that they had there. So there was concern about people like me that have agricultural businesses. We're under a different definition. So
That's right.
this is strictly the commercial, like the vet hospital and some of those.
Vet hospital, or if there was an accessory agricultural use where you had, like, for example, like, Dibble Farms has a little shop, that'd be another accessory type agricultural use where they want to have a little sign. So this will allow them to have that.
So brings up one, what about Arrowhead Stables down there? They're an accessory ag as well, if I remember correctly.
I'd have to look at that. Between now and council meeting, I'll have an answer for you on that one. See if it's
I
an
don't
accessory
have
or
a problem
principal.
with it. I'm just trying to think of which commercial ones would
Yeah.
be applicable there.
Yeah, and they just finally took down their Arrowhead Stable sign and put up the reception center sign, because that's what they're using the secondary use of that building is as a reception center.
I'll have to take a look at that, but I'll. see if
So
can
I
find an
like
answer.
in the planning commission that they're held to a little different standard to not have full signage, because that does help in a somewhat way conserve that ag feeling. So I think you did a good job there.
Thanks.
Especially with the height and size and limited lighting as well, right?
Yeah, we think that'll be
Thought
good
that was very
compatible
good.
lighting, yep.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns, council? Okay.
Looks like my staff slipped a Wilkinson in there that I hadn't seen, so I don't know, not related to that one that I know of.
Blazer. Okay, well, that was good discussion. Thank you very much. We're going to now move on to our presentation on the secondary water, which will be presented by Steve Jackson. And looks like we got some other water professionals out there with him, so we may have a few more that assist you. Is that correct?
Yeah, if needed, I'll tag team them in here for a minute, so.
Okay.
Well, Mayor, Council, it's good to be here tonight. Been asked to kind of go over our secondary water system and be able to kind of explain the importance of how that integrates into our overall water resource plan that we have. So really quickly, a few years ago, we had a water master plan study done and completed, and some of the objectives of that were very clearly laid out, that we want to provide Layton residents with enough water to meet their needs in the most efficient and cost-effective way possible. So there are sources of water that are drinking water quality. There are sources of water that are not drinking water quality, and both can be used to provide the water that we need indoor and outdoor to the citizens, and we want to do that effectively and cost effectively as in the most efficient way that we can. So the other components of that are to ensure that we have enough water now and into the future. I don't know if any of you saw the KSL report that said we now have the 16th driest month of or water year on record. But we kind of go in cycles, and we have water years that are good and water years that are bad, and some in between. And so we just want to make sure that we're planning for the good years and the bad years as well, and having enough water there. And part of that is promoting water conservation and preserving the water rights that we do have here as the water laws. Gary can probably speak a lot better on it as we, if we got into that, but the water laws in this state are interesting, and that sometimes you can lose water rights if you aren't using them. So we want to make sure we're preserving those rights into the future for the use of the citizens here in Layton. And then one of the final items was that we wanted to try and maintain reasonable culinary water rates by using secondary water. So as we got into the plan, we took this map here and we decided, well, what makes sense as we get into the water demand areas. And so the green areas on the drawing there are areas that are currently using culinary water, and we anticipate will continue to use culinary water for outdoor use. The red areas are Case Creek irrigation, yellow areas are Davis Weber Canal areas, and the blue area is the Weber Basin service area, and the purple area out on the west side of town is the future potential secondary water service area that we have. So what this plan allowed for us to do is to balance the amount of infrastructure that was required to be built in both the culinary and the secondary system. By utilizing the secondary water that's available, we reduce the demand on the culinary system, and it allows us to build smaller pipelines, smaller reservoirs, storage tanks, smaller pump stations. A lot of infrastructure can be reduced in size if we use the secondary system effectively and efficiently to provide the outdoor water that's required. And in addition, using this secondary water puts the water in our reservoirs on the east side of town, and also the waters from Davis Weber Canal that they bring through their system into the city to beneficial use. And it actually provides them with the ability to protect their shares as well as generate revenue for their programs and their systems. So as we looked at this, the recommendation of the master plan was to bring the secondary water use or the systems under the purview, the umbrella, I guess you would say, of the city, and create kind of one system managed by a single entity. And so that's what we've been working towards as we implement this master plan, as a way to bring these systems together so that the citizens of Layton effectively and efficiently receive the secondary water. And many of them think that the city already operates these systems, and so it would be an effective way to manage the water resources, balance them both on the culinary and the secondary side. So just a few items here. Currently, we have 3 companies that provide pressurized irrigation water or secondary water, and Holmes Creek Irrigation is another irrigation company in the city. They don't have any pressurized lines, but they do provide flood irrigation. The prices vary, as you can see on the screen, from company to company, but they can also vary based on the contracts that have been signed and also the size of the lot that somebody owns. So some of these companies have a tiered system when it comes to the size of the property that you're watering. In this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about some challenges that are going on out west in the Case Creek area. In the source of Andy Adams Reservoir, there's some minerals, iron in the water that is causing some staining, but wanted to point out that the area we're talking about when we talk about this issue is actually just the green areas on your screen that are west of I-15. So the service area, the green area on the east side of the I-15 is actually serviced from a different source, and they are not experiencing the mineral challenges that are in the Case Creek system. So and then the pink areas out west are Davis Weber Canal, and the blue area again is Weber Basin's service area, which the city currently contracts with Weber Basin to operate and maintain that system for them. So some of the issues that we see system-wide, this is all systems, not just Case Creek, is there are areas where we have low pressure. They have inadequate pressure to use the sprinklers, and so some people have to install pumps on their system in order to get the pressure that they have. Weaver Basin has repeatedly communicated to us that they provide volume of water, but not necessarily guarantee pressure. And so some of these homeowners have to install pumps to be able to pressurize their system. And then other areas we have high pressure. And in those areas, pressure regulators can be used to control the misting and the blowing of the water into places that you don't want. But a lot of people don't complain about the high pressure, but they also don't sometimes understand that lower pressures actually might be a solution to some of the misting problems that people see. Smell is an issue with a lot of systems because it's untreated water. It's ditch water. It's water that comes off the mountain and goes into our reservoirs. It's definitely not drinking water quality in the secondary system, and so sometimes it has smells and it grows stuff, and some of the reservoirs have algae in them that has to be treated, things like that. So clogged filters are another big one. We have some areas of the city where those filters have to be cleaned out weekly in order to operate the system, and that's just part of the maintenance process that has to happen on a secondary system. And then the staining issue that we can talk a little bit more about. There's minerals in the water. They're natural minerals that are picked up as water flows through, wherever it flows, and sometimes the water can cause staining. One of the common ones is iron that we see in the Case Creek system. There's manganese in other systems that actually leaves a big black stain on things. There's calcium in water that can cause calcium deposits. So none of them are perfect systems, but they're systems that are effective, and they're useful to help manage the system. And every system that we have currently operating in the city has one or more of these issues that has to be dealt with. And so some extra effort, as it says down there, is generally required by all users of secondary water in order to maintain the system and keep it functioning. Up until recently, there was you couldn't even find a meter that would be able to be used on secondary systems because the water quality would plug them off, and so technologies have advanced to where now we can use meters on our secondary systems and kind of help maintain the amount of water that's being used. So just some pictures here. There's a couple pictures of low pressure with the pumps that have to be installed. People put them in their yards and make those connections, and then they have to run power to them and operate them in order to pressurize their system. Dirty filters. These filters are installed in a lot of homes, a lot of places, and without those filters, many of the systems would just plug off at the sprinkler head, and so they have to maintain these, and like we said, some of these are actual requirements are weekly cleanings to be able to make their systems work. Overwatering and waste is a big problem. We have a lot of systems that are designed to just spray over the sidewalks and the concrete, and this picture here shows that sprinkler sat and ran for over half an hour just wasting water into the gutter, and so those are all maintenance things that need to be adjusted and taken care of as you own and operate the systems, and as homeowners, that's the responsibility as they put those systems in. So to discuss some of the issues with the staining, there's been a lot of discussion about how we can assist with that, and Case Creek has identified a chemical product called Unrust that actually allows homeowners to easily remove rust stains from their home or the concrete or anything that they find that they have issues with here, and it's fairly economical. It's effective. There's actually a rust preventer that can be used. Some of the things that we're seeing is if you'll seal the concrete that you have on your driveways, sidewalks with a concrete sealant, it helps prevent the rust from accumulating. But some of the pictures we have, you can see there's rust on the fences where the water has been sprayed up against the fence, and this is the after picture of it once that Unrust product is used. This is a picture of someone's driveway that has had overspray on it, and it's turned it that kind of brown, rust color. Some people pay to have their concrete stained. This was not an intentional concrete stain, and this is the product that afterwards was used to take that rust color off, and that was the unrust product that we have here. So there's options out there, and we wanted to show you a video. So last year in May, our public works crews went out and they did a test product, and this video will change, but you can see all of this along the fence is the rust color from the fence being sprayed by the sprinkler system. So we'll see if this video will play for us here. So this is one of our public works employees. Went out, he's simply got a garden sprayer, mixed the unrust product in, and is now just spraying the fence with this product. And it's a 3-minute video, so we'll just let it run. And as you start to watch, you can see that the product itself begins to take the rust staining off without actually having to scrub the fence. He does use a cloth a little bit later on as he's sprayed this to wipe it down, but we imagine if you had a hose or something like that, you might be able to just wash this off when you're done. But you can see the discoloration on the fence on that right side has already started to dissipate quite a bit just from the spray. The product is safe to use around your house. It's been tested. It meets all of the safety requirements, so it won't kill your plants, and it won't, make your pets or anything sick. And so it's an effective tool that's being used to help with this.
So this video shows both types of problems then, both the iron rust and the black.
I think the black is probably just a really heavy spray on the fence, and so that is a really big accumulation of the rust color. The manganese in the water is not as big of an issue here as what you would see in other systems that are around. It just depends on where the soils are, but it is a really effective treatment. And I mean, that's just what is that? Just a terry cloth towel, and I mean, just no pressure at all. He's just wiping it down to get rid of the residue. And
I will say though that I know several people that have done that, and it has dulled the finish on these fences as well. So
it's done what now?
It's dulled the finish on these fences.
Okay.
Keep them wet.
So how often do these folks have to clean their fence? What are you hearing?
So last year we had a lot of complaints with the education Case Creek has done, and what we've tried to help do. We've seen a huge drop in the amount of complaints that we've received. We've had people call, and we try to explain to them what needs to happen. The best way to resolve this issue is to not blast your fence with your sprinklers, and I know that seems kind of a simple answer, but that's really the best way to do it. But there's a slide after this. As soon as the video ends, we'll go to the next slide, and we'll show you a few things that we've done to try and help mitigate it from a system-wide level at the reservoir. But it just depends on how much you blast your fence and how often you want to clean it. I mean, it could be once a year, it could be once every couple years. It really just kind of depends on what you're looking for.
What about the concrete foundation? Because I know that there were some folks that were concerned about their foundation as well.
So the concrete picture that we showed you with the driveway here, that they sprayed that on, and then it was basically just a stiff bristle brush, like an outdoor broom that they used, and they just scrubbed that with that brush, and then they hosed it off, and that was all it took to remove that. So I would imagine that on the foundations of the home, again, if you can avoid spraying your foundation, that would be the best, but if not, there might have to be some bristle brush work done to be able to remove that. So some of the things they've done, they've put 3 of these big bubblers in up at Andy Adams Reservoir, and what these are is they're large canisters that have air hoses, air compressors are on they've built a shed with an air compressor, and then they pump air into these and then it helps circulate the water. They've installed 3 of them. They plan to install a 4th one coming up here in the next couple of weeks to be able to help aerate this pond, and it helps break down the minerals in the water and also helps reduce the odor. I've been unaware of any real odor complaints that have come in recently, but that doesn't mean somebody hasn't complained. I know that the odor has been significantly reduced from what it has been in the years past because these bubblers are circulating that water now, bringing it up to the surface. Ultimately, the plans are when the system is built in the next few years, there will be, let me go back, a connection between Hobbs Reservoir and Addie Adams Reservoir with the pipe systems, and that will actually help dilute some of these minerals as well and lower that concentration, which would help with the staining. And eventually Holmes Creek Reservoir is on the plan to be connected as well. So all of those things would help to dilute these minerals, but at the end of the day, the system is functioning. It provides the water. It may be a little bit of a nuisance, and it may be unpleasant for people to want to go out here and do this type of maintenance, but it is common on a lot of systems to do that. I've seen other cities that have the manganese problem, and you can go look at Street View and see black staining marks on fences and homes as well, and it's just a part of the maintenance of the system and the homeowners, I guess, duty or responsibilities to adjust their sprinklers and do what they can to minimize the overspray.
So I want to take time to share personally. So I was under the Weber Basin irrigation system for 27 years. Mm-hmm. And in one location we had the pump, which required annual maintenance. The next 21 years we had a reducer because the pressure was so high in the low area that we were in. And it didn't require much of other than taking the filter out once or twice a year, cleaning it and draining the system. Now we're out where we're at out west on Case Creek, and I will tell you that our subdivision is new, and I watched a fence that went in last fall already start to stain this year. So no, they haven't fixed the problem up at the creek. It's still causing staining as of now. And I have a secondary spigot out in front of my home to water plants with that when I turn that water on, I want to gag and throw up. It smells so bad. And at 10 o'clock at night when the sprinklers come on, you can smell it in the air. I never once smelled Weber Basin water up on the other side. So no, this is different. And I'm in an area where it's not us. I can't go out and clean my building. I don't own my building. And so for us, it's not a simple thing. It's, we've now got to hire somebody through the property management company to come out and do that and cause HOA fees to go up. And I just think there's got to be an answer to this. Looking at the map, and I know that down the road, the discussion of taking over all the systems and operating as one, is there any way, because Davis-Weber Canal is already out west, that something could be moved along faster in that area to take over that section of Case Creek and bring in Davis-Weber Canal water to solve the problem west of I-15?
To my knowledge, the system that Davis-Weber has out west is not capable of adding that much area all at once, if that makes sense. The source of the Davis-Weber water comes out of the canal near Clearfield, but then it also runs east into the reservoir that's just east of Church Street, just west on Church Street itself, east of Fort Lane. So there are potential areas, but in order to just totally change this area that you're talking about west of I-15, I don't believe that there's capacity in that system. It wasn't designed to take all of that. That's what the master plan is for, is to bring multiple feeds of water from the east side and also from the north down into the area.
Okay, because the pink is literally adjacent to the green out here.
Yeah, it is.
And so
but some of the issues that we're having in talking with Davis Weber Canal is that they've actually got pressure issues down into Kaysville and on the south end of Layton, and so to add your entire area to that would just exacerbate that problem, because there has to be some pretty extensive work being done. So back to your point, you're absolutely right. There is a different source of water here. The Weber Basin water that you're receiving is water that comes from up in the reservoirs east in Echo, and Davis Weber actually owns some of those waters up there as well. But that's the challenge of the secondary system, and yeah, I hope I haven't implied that the system is fixed. The bubblers are there to help reduce some of that. They're not going to solve the problem unless the water is diluted, but it will help those who, you know, choose to not spray their homes with it. The staining is not occurring on every single home out west. It's occurring in large areas where people are just overwatering. They're allowing it to spray everything from their fences to their homes to their sidewalks, and so yeah, the more water you put down, the faster it's going to stain, and it's going to cause problems, and that's where, you know, sealing the concrete is a good step. You know, using this product, and I can feel for you having to have the HOA come in and maintain those, but at the same time, if it's spraying the home, then maybe the situation needs to be looked at from a maintenance of the system, where blasting it up against a home is really not an effective way to water your yard and maintain your system. So.
Well, and it's fences, and it's not just our HOA, it's all the HOAs along the parkway and things like that. Why is it not a problem in the east area that Case Creek services? Why did this not start until the new construction out west?
Because the area east of I-15 you're talking about, because that water actually comes off of reservoirs east of Highway 89, and that water is actually fed from the same streams that are up in that area, and then Weber Basin also has connections that are fed. So that system is a completely different source. Just like you mentioned your time on the Weber Basin system, that's a completely different source of water. And so it's not like our drinking water wells where we're pulling from the same aquifer in all of our wells. This is very distinct sources, and the mineral deposits in this Andy Adams Reservoir area have an iron content that's higher than the sources that are coming out of the mountains that are feeding into the Weber Basin system or these reservoirs east of Highway 89.
So however the system is set up on the east side, can it not bypass Andy Adams to connect to the west?
No, the system on the east side is a substantially smaller reservoir. It's not even close to the capacity that Andy Adams has. So in order to, again, balance the system, there would have to be major hydraulic changes and piping and systems put in. So again, that's where the Hobbs Reservoir, Holmes Reservoir, and Andy Adams Reservoir tying together in key locations down at Gordon Avenue and down at Gentile Street are critical to the future components that the system has.
Okay. Any idea on timing?
So we anticipate that the connection between Hobbs and Andy Adams would probably be in the next 5 to 7 years. That's kind of the anticipated growth rate that we're seeing with the system. Depending on development and how it occurs, it could happen sooner, but it's really development driven and demand driven. These projects are pretty expensive. I think that project on the master plan is about a $1.2 million project to be able to put that line in for the distance that it needs to go.
And do you have any idea how much growth is occurring in this west side? I mean, I live out there. It's like homes are going up like crazy. I'm assuming they're going to be in that same situation.
They are, but again, the system was built with a certain capacity, and the pipes that are out there are maintaining that system. So that's where the master plan anticipates that in that 5 to 7 year range is when we'll need to connect these two pipes together. But the current feed that we have will allow for quite a few more years of service before we have to up or increase those feed lines.
And what's the proposed time to create a system that brings the three systems together?
I believe the third system would be, I'd have to go back and look, but I think it's out probably 12 to 15 years before we would need to connect those. There's discussions about connecting Holmes Reservoir into Andy Adams Reservoir in order to bring the water in and feed it through that reservoir, but to connect the line down at Gentile Street would be further out in the future.
Okay, and the timing on the Case Creek becoming the second system that the city,
So we're working on that right now. Gary is actually working with the attorneys from Case Creek. We hope to be able to get things back into the swing and come talk to you as the council and also those shareholders on Case Creek's side. But with the pandemic that has occurred, it's been difficult to have public meetings, and so we've had to kind of put some brakes on that. But we're anticipating that soon, very soon, we would be able to do that. I don't know if you have any more updates, Gary, but yeah.
and the question I have, so there's a discrepancy in the amount that each homeowner has to pay based on system.
Yeah.
So initially, it's not a huge difference, $150, $200 between Weber Basin and Case Creek. But when we get to Davis Weber, that's a substantial difference. So when this would become one system, would that be equalized then among homeowners, or would it still be based on where your water came from?
No, I think the plan overall, and maybe Tracy can talk to that if there's more detail, is that we will try to equalize
Okay.
that system. It will be under one purview with Layton City. Again, the $150 with Weber Basin is kind of relative. They're moving everybody to a minimum of $150, but if you connect on today, you're paying substantially more than that. So there's kind of that swing in there. But yeah, the intent is not to necessarily adversely impact somebody just because of where they've chosen to live. That's part of why we're trying to make sure we're efficient and effective in how we're utilizing these resources.
Okay, and then I have just one last question. So you had on your slide that the culinary water provides or maintains a reasonable culinary rates by using secondary water because it promotes water conservation.
Yeah.
Considering the majority of the users of these systems are not on meters, only the new construction, from my understanding, is on meters. And I've kind of tried to find out from each district how many are metered, and it's not even at half. How does an open-ended $150 a year water promote water conservation? Unless we have a program in place that educates residents or starts moving towards retrofitting meters, how does secondary water really promote water conservation?
It doesn't necessarily promote water conservation in the form of maybe less water use. That's actually a huge problem that the systems have. As you look at Weber Basin and what they've done with their meters, they see a 30+% reduction in the water use simply by metering the systems. We are working with Weber Basin currently to come up with some tools to help homeowners that are using our culinary system actually understand how much they're using indoor and outdoor. Weber Basin provides monthly statements for those homes that are on meters, and really it's an education system that we have to get into. The thought was that it's an unlimited supply. For decades it's been an unlimited supply, and people just turn it on and use how much they want and whenever they want, and so it's a very difficult conversation to have, and changing habits and changing, maybe the way people landscape their yards. There's a lot of ways to landscape your yard to just use less water, but it still looks aesthetically pleasing and functional. And so there's a lot of programs and policies that are kind of being looked at from that standpoint to help, with rebates. There's some cities are going as far as saying, hey, we'll pay for you to re-landscape portions of your yard, and we're not looking at those per se, but we're definitely looking at, what is the most effective way to educate and help homeowners understand how much they're using, how much they really need, and then eventually the state is moving towards, requiring meters. There's a couple of bills that have been passed recently, and then all of the systems have had to report their plans to try and meter the systems into the future because it is such an important resource. So the conservation part of secondary comes into play when we have take-or-pay contracts with Weber Basin, we have our well water rights, and if we bump up against those because people are choosing to overuse the water out in the system as an outdoor use, or because we have the programmed in to have the West Layton area be on secondary, and then they choose not to use it, those are conservation measures in themselves that we need to focus on and say, hey, the system is designed for you, if you have secondary available, to use it. We know it's not, drinking water quality, but it's effective, it gets the job done, and it helps, maintain our system in a way that we don't have to go out and continually buy new water or try and find new sources of water simply because people choose to irrigate outside with culinary water.
And I agree 100% with what you're having to say, but I have not seen any education of, unless you go to Weber Basin and take a course or are on their system and get those monthly statements. So I would hope that as part of this plan, that education of water conservation is a priority, as well as the metering. You can meter and that's great, but unless you educate, I don't think that there's a full understanding of what to do, so.
Yeah,
Well,
I
and
agree.
To answer your question there, Councilman Fitzpatrick, I think that this, as you can see, that this entire system requires a lot of more discussion on this and more in-depth. And I personally think that we can definitely address the water conservation as well, and maybe have some incentives out there for folks to kind of look at, not necessarily zero-scape, but close to it, just to kind of help in the overall consumption of water.
And that's why I've asked for the landscape ordinance to be opened, to look at other options that are local scape or water-wise, or not necessarily cold weather turf or whatever, so.
And we're working with Chad and his team and group staff to talk about those. Local Scapes is a big program that all of the big water agencies are using right now to try and educate people on how to landscape their yard, but also keep the look that they want. We've got a lot of people who push back and say we don't want to be the rockscape place. We want to have vegetation and we want it to look nice, and there's ways to do it. It just takes some education, and unfortunately it's a heavy lift, and it's not something we shouldn't try to do, but it does take some time to change mindsets and change education about it. So
Does
Any
anyone
other
else have questions or
Yeah,
comments?
I have a couple of comments. First, full disclosure, I am a board member of Davis Weaver Canal, for full disclosure on my comments. I also supported, these guys can tell you I had some pretty serious issues with the water master plan, and I still have a few, but I do support the plan that we've come up with. I still think there's some pretty big hiccups and things that we have to overcome with it. But I'm maybe not as concerned as you, Don, of conservation, because we are very blessed in the city to have the water resources that we do, and we should have. And I think some of these guys would agree that if we properly use all the sources that we have, which is our culinary and all of the irrigation companies, we should be able to cover ourselves quite well. I do think there are some significant problems to overcome with this, but I think it is a long-term workable plan. I guess my other comment would be is one of the main reasons the past council voted for the water rate increases was to support and fund some of these major projects that Steve's talking about. Because we're not talking just $1 million or $2 million, we're talking a lot of millions of dollars to run some of these projects. And that was why, back in our budget discussions, that I was kind of adamant about the water increase, because I think they're necessary. And by the charts that they've drawn out, we're going to have to pay for it. And so my question to Steve would be, we passed those water rate increases. I don't think you have time tonight, but I think it would be helpful for us as a council to come back and review where we are on that timeline with the different projects that were outlined. Because one of my concerns would be is we pass the water rate increases and we bring the money in, are we really spending it where we said we would, and kind of on the timelines. And I think it would be helpful for them and me as well to know where we actually stand on that. I know we reviewed it a little bit in the past, but kind of a better timeline of, how to solve some of these problems, I think would be helpful.
Might be a good discussion to have when I come back here in about a month. Now that the summer season's winding down, Steve and I could get together and we'll see where we're at revenue-wise after our second summer and where we're at on the projects and make sure those are lining up.
Well, and I think that it wasn't, Tom, that we just did away with the water thing. I think those of us that were new were willing to give you more if that's what's needed. We want to have the ability to make sure that we're not just collecting money to collect money. We want to make sure that not only are we collecting money, is it being used appropriately, but if it's not enough, our political careers are on the line by doing that, but maybe the 10% wasn't sufficient for what you actually need to fulfill this plan. And I think that that's the reason why we voted the way we did, is to bring it back to us. And let's look at it from here forward and make sure we're doing what's absolutely necessary. So don't think it's like we just don't think you need the money to do anything. I think we want to take responsibility for what needs to go forward. Right, guys?
So that was the discussion when
Yep.
budget, when we voted on the budget, was just what you said, Tom, and what Tracy's saying now. I mean, that's perfect timing. After the second summer, we can look at it and see what we need to do and what projects we think, make sure that we have a good timeline and see what the numbers look like.
Well,
So I think
and
it's a
the
great
cost
idea.
of the project too,
Yeah.
because I mean, when you talk about the different phases that we need to go through in order to accomplish the overall objective, we definitely need to take into consideration the dollar amounts
Right.
there and also the timing of it, the plan. So I think this has been good information. I appreciate everybody taking the time to kind of ask the questions and getting them out there, because I mean, that's the only way we can kind of move things forward, if we have these type of educational and informational meetings here. So
Thank you.
From what
One last comment or two. I think the important thing, a lot of this is going to take a lot of years. And I think one of the important things to realize at this point is they are still private irrigation companies, and they still operate independently. Really, the staining problems and some of those problems are really not the cities at this point. They're the private irrigation companies. Yeah, someday maybe they all be brought under the city direction or control or whatever we want to call it, but as of now, they're not. And I think that's important to realize. So when we talk about the costs of different ones, and Don, your desire for everybody to pay the same amount, I don't think that will ever happen, mainly because of Weber Basin. They're a kind of a quasi-government, and a lot of their water rates are set from my understanding of when those projects were done. And you can't all of a sudden control those rates, because they're the ones that control those rates, really. So, I mean, we could adjust a lot of them in the future, but I don't think we'll ever get Weber Basin rates control of that, because they have that. Is that correct, Steve?
That is a good distinction, Tom. Thank you for that. The Weber Basin system that we operate and maintain for them is simply a contract. They've hired us essentially as the operators, but they still control and own all of their facilities, and they choose their billing rates, and it's all based on a lot of factors. Some of those pipes are actually owned by the Bureau of Reclamation and not necessarily Weber Basin, and so there's a lot of nuances to that one, but you're absolutely right. The ones that we would be focused on bringing under our umbrella as full ownership maintenance, those we would look at possibly trying to balance out that way.
Okay, I heard Mr. Morris make a comment. Do you want to chime in here?
Thank
Mr.
you.
Morris?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of comments. A question. We talked about maybe to Council Members Day's comment about the water increase, and I agree with Don and with Zach on we got to look at that and see where we are, and if we have to, based on what we need as infrastructure, then we invest in it, and we're not just asking for money to ask for money. Secondly, I'm not sure that the extra 10% increase, water rate increase, is going to help with the smell and help with the rusting issues and the staining. I don't think that's part of it. I don't think you can pay enough to do that. And then my other question is, as far as the cost goes, of currently with what residents are paying, do they pay? Is it based on access to secondary water, or if they are hooked up to secondary water that they're put into the tier where their water rates are different?
The tiers are, the system's based on access.
And not hookups.
Correct.
So we do have some residents that have access, don't want to use the secondary water because of those issues, and are using culinary water, and they're in essence paying, they're paying more, and that's one of the issues that we're having as well from hearing from the residents.
Correct. So a while back we talked about that, and I hate to promote that you wouldn't pay for Case Creek water if you had it at your house, but there was some significant discussion with some residents who decided that they contacted Case Creek and said, we're not going to pay this anymore because we're not going to use it. And there wasn't really any pushback. So then we did some analysis of the difference. You're on a rate structure that says you have access to the water, but you choose not to use it. Well, then you're choosing not to use a source that's available to you. So there's a bit of a penalty built in there. Well, if you calculate it out, a reasonable user is going to spend maybe $200 to $300 extra on culinary water. Well, if you're not paying for your secondary water, it's kind of a break even. I mean, you're probably paying a little more, but at the same time, you're using culinary water. You don't have smell, you don't have clogs, you don't really have any issues at all. And so you do get a significant benefit if you decide to use culinary water. Plus, you're using a much more valuable water resource, something that's had to be treated on your lawn. So you would expect, the reasonable person would expect to pay more to be able to use that kind of water in an outdoor setting. But we did run some numbers. I could send some of that over to you. I don't have them in the slides tonight that showed, and also another thing that happened after last summer when we approved the 20% increase was that we did go through and look at the tier structure and change that quite a bit on those that don't have access to secondary water, so that it wasn't as penalizing when they went out to use, because they don't have an option. So we changed that structure up to the top tier being 80,000 gallons instead of 60,000 gallons. Still, if I compare the two rate structures on a person that uses up to 79,000 gallons, so they don't quite make it into that top tier, they're paying about $250 more a summer season. So from May to September, that's within the realm of what you pay for secondary water, somewhere between 150 and 375. It's in that ballpark. So we felt like that was reasonable.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation.
thank
I
you.
think that helps with a lot of folks there.
Okay.
Council, do you have any other questions regarding the water? Okay. Thank you very much, both of you, for presenting this information to us. I think it was very valuable. It certainly, I think, will help us as we move forward and when we dive into a deeper dive on the water issue. Lastly, on my agenda, I know we've got about 4 minutes left. I'm just going to quickly report on the mayor's report regarding the storm. I think you guys might be interested here in this information. In 2011, when we had that storm, there was over 10,000 tons of waste that had to go up to the landfill. Compared to this recent storm, we had about 6,500. So the difference, though, that I'm going to point out here is back in 2011, we had all kinds of long lines, and it was very chaotic for several weeks. Interesting enough, on this particular storm, the first day, and actually the day the storm was still taking place, was probably our worst day as far as the amount of long lines that we had. But after that, the folks up at the landfill were able to quickly respond, and they had a system figured out, and they did not experience as many long lines. In fact, it didn't really go out and spill out onto 193 after that. However, here's the interesting part. During our peak season, when there's a lot of people taking a lot of loads to the landfill, on one given day, their largest number of loads that had gone into the landfill was about 1,200 loads. Just for this storm, they far exceeded that maximum amount that they've ever, I guess their maximum amount that they've had in the past. This year, off of this storm, they actually had over 2,800 loads that came through the landfill in one given day. And it happened to be the last Saturday. And I will tell you, I was one of those people that visited that day. And there was virtually very little, there was hardly any waiting. I mean, they really by then had it extremely dialed in, but there was a lot of loads that went in there off this last storm. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information there on how quickly they were able to adjust and accommodate the amount of loads going in. So with that, I will entertain a motion to close our work meeting.
So moved.
Okay, thank you.
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, you now have 1 minute to stand up and stretch. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody out to our city council meeting for October 1st. The time is now 7:03. We took a quick break from our previous work meeting, so I appreciate the patience of everyone there. As customary, with our opening of our council meeting, we have a prayer and pledge conducted by one of the council members or myself. Tonight typically would have been Mr. Morris's turn, but he is out of town, so I'll go ahead and fill in for that. So I'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'd like to all rise and follow me in the pledge, I'd appreciate it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful to be able to gather here this evening as the governing body of this great city of Layton. We're very honored to be able to serve the citizens and ask you to please be with us as we conduct the business that is required and necessary to keep our city functioning properly. We're extremely grateful for the protection we receive here by all of our first responders and folks in our public works and any of the other departments that have had to step up and really kind of help us through these tumultuous times. We ask thee please to again watch over this great city, bring a calm and peaceness and unity to us all, and let us know that we're there for one another and that we're going to do our best to do what's right, and that tonight's meeting will go smoothly. And we thank thee dearly for all those who have taken the time to prepare for this meeting and the presentations they'll be giving. We thank thee again for all that we've been blessed with. We say this dearly in thy name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay. Thank you, council, for being here. And we do have two sets of minutes that we need to approve. We have our minutes from the August 20th, 2020 meeting. It was a council meeting, and also a council meeting minutes for September 3rd, 2020. Do any of you have any corrections or changes to those meetings? Those notes? Okay, seeing that there's none, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
Madam Mayor, I motion that we approve minutes of Layton City Council meeting August 20, 2020, and minutes of Layton City Council meeting September 3rd, 2020.
Okay. Second? Second by Mr. Thomas over there. Okay, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much, council. We'll now move on to our municipal events announcements. Does anyone have any announcements there regarding municipal events?
It's not in my thing, it's Parks and Rec, but I happened to see on the Facebook page tonight that they're moving ahead with their October 30th Halloween bash at Central Davis. And it is, you do have to call ahead and get a reservation. So we are doing a little something for Halloween.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you bringing that to everyone's attention. Okay, seeing that there's no other announcements, we'll move on to our citizens' comments. And if there's any citizens at all that want to comment, or, I don't know, Gary, has there been anything at all come on online at this point? No? Okay, all right. Well, seeing that there's no comments to take place, we're moving right along. We're already down to item number 5, which is our consent items. And I should say consent item. We have one on the agenda tonight, and that item will be presented by our city attorney, Mr. Gary Crane.
So this is an administrative item that you have the opportunity of participating in tonight. Connected to an administrative determination that was made some time ago. And if it's okay, if you have any questions regarding this, this is an aspect that all of you are coming in contact with. In fact, quite recently, the issue of HOAs, CC&Rs, how to private streets, those types of things. I think it's going to come back to you. We're probably going to spend more time in the education process and maybe even looking at our ordinances regarding those things. This is a subdivision, Seneca Cove, that is located on Oak Ridge Drive. If you're headed north on Oak Ridge Drive, just before you hit Cherry Lane, there's a little subdivision in there. It has a sign at the entrance that says private drive, private subdivision. One of the new owners in there actually looked up the records on the subdivision as it was approved way back. I think it was 2002 is when it was actually approved. And at that time, the developer had some instructions. The first instruction was, you've got to put into place CC&Rs, which he did, and you've got to develop an HOA. Well, there's only 5 homes in the subdivision. And so he never did get around to, he lives in one of the homes, and they were all owned by family, and so he never did get around to actually putting into place an HOA. And HOAs, as you're aware, are a little bit expensive to put together. So they've just been cooperating amongst each other. It has a single meter, and later I think each of the homes requested an individual meter, and I think we read them actually as we come down the street. So it is really a private drive. It was restricted to 26 feet in width, and so really even the width makes it substandard as far as the city is concerned. And so it definitely is private in nature. But when we went to look at the plat, there was no indication of the plat on the plat as to who that belonged to. And in fact, the county records show that it doesn't belong to anybody. It's kind of a no man's land. The city hasn't been plowing it. These folks have been doing all the work of plowing it. But what we decided to do, most of the plats do have a designation that this is a private drive and that it belongs to the HOA, and the HOA takes responsibility for it, or the individual owners might take responsibility for it voluntarily. This piece of property doesn't belong to anybody under the plat, and so we're trying to correct that at the request of at least one property owner in that subdivision. And what we'll be doing is just dedicating, or not dedicating, but transferring the interest to all 5 as an undivided interest, as you're aware, as tenants in common in the road. So now all of them have the same ownership interest in the road. All of them have the same responsibility, and now all of them can essentially cooperate or enforce against one that might not cooperate in putting the road together. So that's the logic in this conveyance, is correcting a problem that arose in 2002 as a result of that item not being on the plat. Are there any questions on this or any other aspect of HOAs and CC&Rs?
Yeah, don't get me started.
Here we go.
You really asked that question?
No, the question I have though, Gary, is in future sales, so if one of those 5 sells, is there documentation then that is somehow confirmed to be carried with that property?
Yes, it's connected to the property so that it would travel with the title
Okay,
to their property. It would travel with them.
okay.
So it would be sold. And so it's kind of unique. CC&Rs, and just a real quick education in CC&Rs, cities don't typically become involved in CC&Rs because they are really a private contract between the individuals that move into the subdivision amongst themselves. Originally, the developer is the main person or owner in the CC&Rs, and then the developer, as the subdivision builds, will be replaced by, usually at some point, the CC&Rs say it's 75% occupancy or sale of units, then it shifts to an HOA, and then the HOA begins to take care of all the common areas within the subdivision. The CC&Rs regulate all that, are supposed to regulate all that, and they're subject to change depending on what the individuals, the owners in the HOA determine those changes ought to be. But the city really does not have very much to do with that. The only time we've ever injected ourselves into a CC&R would be if there was some common area that, for example, the parkway that the city has and the maintenance of the parkway, we do require that they take care of that and maintain that parkway. And we require that to be in their CC&Rs, that they actually be responsible for putting that together and the HOA be responsible for paying for that maintenance. But typically, and this is a question that comes up a lot, the small subdivisions, we've got another one coming up where it's just 3 lots. And I've had an attorney contact me and say, do I have to set up an HOA for 3 lots? The city would allow on smaller subdivisions this type of arrangement where those 3 lots could own the street collectively, and then we would require a permanent maintenance agreement between the 3 property owners, so we would have them file that on the properties, and it could not be removed without the permission of all 3 property owners. So you'll see that one coming probably at some time in the future, and because I've been talking to that attorney about it. This is 5 lots. You know how much it costs. I know Dawn does, how much it costs to establish an HOA and to pay the fees and the filing fees and the insurance, and sometimes you have to pay a party. If it's big enough HOA, you pay a party to actually manage it for you. These are all costs that could be avoided if it's a smaller subdivision. We can handle it that way. One of the misnomers that these HOAs often have, there's common area. A lot of the streets are probably they're not substandard as far as the city goes anymore, because some time ago we required that the streets be constructed in the same manner that our regular public streets are constructed. But a lot of the old subdivisions that were developed a long time ago, the reason developers went with the private subdivision was because they could build substandard improvements. And so we're seeing a lot of situations where these folks are starting to come to a point where their infrastructure is about 20 years old. They're having to overlay their streets, or they're having to repair their streets, or they're tired of plowing them in the wintertime. And so they've come back in long after the developers left, and maybe 2 or 3 generations later, and they say, can't we just convert these to public streets? Well, the answer is they don't meet the public standard. Oftentimes, the older streets don't even meet the public standard when it comes to the infrastructure under the roadway. They don't have the right size pipes. They don't have the type of materials that we require in our public streets. So it's a very expensive proposition for an old subdivision to come into Layton and say, Layton, would you take these things back? I just want to explain that to you because we've had some requests lately for that type of thing to happen. This is one of them where they potentially asked whether or not we would take this small 26-foot wide street into Layton City, and it has a little T at the end of it rather than a cul-de-sac, and you can barely turn around in it. And of course, there's just absolutely no way. It just wasn't constructed for public maintenance. So are there any questions? I know there's a lot more questions we could ask about CC&Rs and about HOAs, but I'd be glad to just cover any quick ones that you might have.
Require the road now, I mean, they're building a subdivision and on a CCR, whatever you call them, what's a,
Oh, covenants, conditions, and restrictions is what, I'm sorry.
well, I thought it was a band.
That's,
You know,
there was one, CC&R, yeah, Fogarty. Oh,
okay, but, I'm sorry, I got, require them to build our specs
yeah, today we do.
today, that's what I mean.
Today we do, and we've
Before, I
been,
understand it.
before we didn't.
Yeah, okay.
But still, you know, there's an obligation that they have to privately
Sure.
maintain those things, and they selected the HOA for a reason, you know, and so,
But I will say one thing, the city does have a vested interest in the CC&Rs because majority of the newer ones anyway cannot dissolve because the city holds a voting interest in a dissolution, so.
right. Thank you. Just a note, if we have an area that is public, we will participate in those CC&Rs, and we will not allow them to dissolve as long as that obligation exists. So yes, thank you. Yeah. And that was a decision we made some time ago, because if you've got a large area of the parkway that needs to be maintained, and the HOA says, we're going to dissolve, then you don't get that maintained. And so the city, for the sole purpose of the maintenance of that particular common area, would participate in. They're not a voting member, but they are a vetoing member, if that makes sense. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Gary. We appreciate that. Well, being that that's our only consent item, look for a motion to take action.
Okay, Madam Mayor, on our consent item, make a motion that we approve the quick claim deed from Layton City granting an undivided 1/5 interest as tenants in common to the Seneca Cove subdivision residents, Resolution 2059.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Dave? Mr. Thomas? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Mr. Morris, we heard you. Thank you. Okay. I think that's unanimous, so I appreciate you guys on that. We'll now move on to our public hearing portion of our meeting. With that, I'll turn the time over to Mr. Chad Wilkinson, our Economic Director, to give us the details.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. The proposal before you is for a change to our sign code. That's Title 20 of the Municipal Code. This is a change that would provide for some signage within the agricultural zone for primary and accessory commercial uses. The text is there on the screen in front of you there. The purpose for this is to provide, again, signage where it's not currently specifically allowed. So we've had, I wanted to mention, one of the questions in the work session was related to some of our existing agricultural or agricultural-related uses in the ag zone. Some of those had signage that was approved as part of their conditional use permit process. So they have existing allowed signage that was approved as part of that process. And that's typically, in the past, that was the way these types of signs were allowed. This would be a way to have just, signage that was specified that would be by right signage for these various uses within this zone. The first standard there is number 7 on the screen there. Talks about detached signs in agricultural zoning. Gives some standards, minimum size, maximum height. Talks about materials that should be used within those signs. Also gives some reference to our sign illumination, which I'll talk about a little bit more in just a moment. The maximum height would be 6 feet for these detached signs in the ag zone, 50 square feet I always use as my classic reference for how big that is. Sheet of plywood's 4 by 8, 32 square feet, so that's a little bit bigger than that. Decent area of signage. You can see those other standards related to the materials. I'm going to show some examples in just a few moments that show what that will look like, and what those types of signs would look like. The other standard that we look at is attached signage. So detached signage covers those, things like monument signs that are not attached to the building. Attached signage is given an allowance based on the lineal frontage of the building frontage. There's a square foot of sign area for every lineal foot of building frontage. The main entrance gives a not to exceed 200 square feet. Sign illumination is covered under that same section of code that I'll go through in just a moment. And then it does prohibit things like cabinet signs or electronic message centers as part of that attached signage. The idea here is to give reasonable signage for agricultural uses while maintaining the agricultural character of the zone. As far as illumination goes in the agricultural zone, the standard would be that they need to be indirectly illuminated or halo backlit. I'll show what that means in just a moment on the slides. Same thing with in terms of lighting the buildings, there would be some prohibitions on not doing outlined lighting for those buildings in that ag zone. With that, here's a few examples of the types of signs that could be allowed under the current standards. You can see the variety of materials. You can see an example of that halo lighting on both of these. The bottom middle and the bottom right sign include examples of halo lit signs. Just some subtle lighting behind those lettering and logos. Another few examples of what types of signage could be allowed. Again, the variety of materials, you can see that halo lighting that doesn't necessarily light up the entire sign, but lights up the lettering. Those are just some examples of what could be allowed with this ordinance. This ordinance was reviewed by the Planning Commission at their September 8th meeting. The Planning Commission has voted unanimously to recommend approval of these signage standards, and our recommendation would be that the council adopt Ordinance 20-34, amending Title 20 related to sign regulations and establishing these agricultural signage standards. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I just have one. So in this bottom picture in the middle, it says not allowed cabinet. Can you scroll back to the previous slide? What is the difference between that and the living oak?
This is, instead of being a plastic cabinet, you've got letters on kind of a integrated background, so it would be a stucco or something they were attached to. So the box or cabinet sign would be one that is an internally illuminated sign that's made of plastic or something that has kind of a box around it with that face that's inserted in there.
Oh, okay.
This is individual letters on a background.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I got one. Come on. Tell the agricultural guy I know.
No, like I said in the previous meeting, this was discussed at length in the Planning Commission, and maybe Chad has that definition. There is a definition in the code that separates these commercial uses in the agricultural zone from the agricultural producers. So there's a distinction between a farmer and a producer, and like an Arrowhead stables or the veterinary clinic, that's a commercial use that's allowed in that zone. Maybe you could.
Yeah, that's right. Here's that. We talked about it in the work session a little bit, but there's a distinction made between farmers that are selling their own produce or having stands on their own properties, or even on properties that are zoned commercially or mixed use. So there's some other standards that apply to those.
And that include signage?
Yes.
I mean, so if you put day farms and you're not required to be the 50 feet square?
Yeah, those situations are covered under a separate standard of code.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And to be clear, there are accessory and primary agricultural uses. Some of these are also commercial uses that are allowed as a primary use, but this is addressing those commercial uses, not the farm uses that that Tom is talking about. Or an accessory use that may not be in a farm. For example, if a farm had a small shop where they sold shirts that said, Wilkinson Farm or something on there,
Okay.
that's going to be an accessory ag use, and these signage standards
And
would
that comes
apply.
under it, yeah.
Yep.
And then one other that I saw in here talked about the buildings in the A zone shall not be outlined with lighting. So for instance, and I don't know that they're going to do this, but the stables that are being utilized as a reception center, if they were to hang Christmas lights along the edges of the building or
any kind
clear
of-
lighting or,
Any kind of seasonal decorations would definitely this would not apply to, but I don't have a picture of that, unfortunately, but there are folks that will outline all the edges of a building with either LED lighting or something to accentuate that building. That's the kind of lighting we're talking about, not seasonal or LEDs hanging from an eave or something. We're talking about those that are going up the gables, across the roof line, that are just providing that outline of a building.
okay.
And I wish I had a picture. If there's some good pictures out there, I might be able to find one while we have the public hearing here really quick.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, this is a public hearing, so I need a motion to be able to open up the public portion of this hearing, so,
Make a motion to open up the public hearing.
oh, you're on a roll tonight. Thank you very much.
I'm not on a roll tonight because I haven't eaten.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been, the meeting is now open and seconded. We do need to take a vote on this, that our public meeting is now open. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so this is a public meeting. Anybody who would wish to speak on the topic regarding our sign ordinance that has been outlined by Mr. Chad Wilkinson, you're welcome to. I do know that we'll give it a minute, knowing that there's not a lot of people here tonight, but should anybody need to comment online, we'll give it a second there and see if there's anything that comes in. I think Gary's going to refresh his phone there, or the computer, and if not, then yeah, it's open to the audience. Anyone in the audience who would wish to come up and speak to this particular topic is welcome to. Yeah. Matt Rush. Okay. I think, Gary, okay, so we've refreshed everything, and it doesn't look like there's any comments coming in regarding our public hearing. So knowing that, council, I could entertain a motion to close our public hearing and take action. Who would like to tackle that one?
Madam Mayor, I motion that we close the public hearing and approve Ordinance 2034, the amendment to the Layton Municipal Code, Title 20, Sign Regulations, Chapter 2001, General Provisions, Section 20.01.120, Definitions, Chapter 20.04, Specific Sign Regulations and Permitted Locations, Section 20.04.130, Attached Signs, Section 20.04.160, Sign Clearance and Illumination, and Section 20.04.120, Detached Signs, Area and Location, Commercial and Industrial Zones.
Spoken like a true attorney. Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. This is, since it's a public hearing, I do need to take a roll call vote, so I'll start out with Councilman Day.
Yes.
Councilman Bloxham.
Aye.
Hey, Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Member Fitzpatrick.
Aye.
Councilman Mr. Thomas.
Yeah.
Okay, there you have it. We've been, it's unanimous that the council has approved our public hearing for tonight. Council, I need to, so we have closed our meeting and we voted on it. So really, we're down to any unfinished business. Do any of you have anything that you'd like to bring before us at this time?
I just want to say, and some of them left Public Works, but they just finished the sidewalk going off of Hillfield Road,
Yes.
and that's been a nice thing, and so kudos, for going through and doing something we asked to do, and it was done, and it was done correctly, as far as I know, anyway. It looks good. There won't be any weeds growing there anymore, because now it's cement, and it'll be nice, so kudos to whomever, whatever, but thanks.
That's a good acknowledgement. I appreciate that because I did notice it myself. I was actually out there when they were pouring or just doing the final touches.
Yeah.
So that was great. Okay, with that, that brings our meeting to a close. I need a motion.
You guys don't want to go home after last night. Madam Mayor, I make a motion that we adjourn our meeting.
I second it.
Okay, it's been moved in second. All in favor? Okay, thank you very much, and thank you all those who have watched us on the internet. We appreciate that, and just everyone have a good evening and hopefully a fun weekend coming up. Thank you very much.